She fainted in my garden, holding her child, and whispered, "Please don't let them take her." So I... Varellus. 9 was never meant to be a colony. It was a backup plan, a frostbitten storage rock for dying industries and failed research posts, long abandoned by the Dominion, except for a few skeletal settlements and repurposed outposts. David Rand knew that better than most. He'd come here 2 years ago, not as a settler, not as a miner, not even as a convict, but by choice. After the Frainhold project collapsed under military mismanagement, and after the casualties mounted on both sides, David walked away. From a contract, from the off-world labs, from a guilt. Now, at 34, he lived alone in a dome meant for 6. He worked a basic systems rotation, salvaging old heating cores, maintaining the fuel flow for nearby water rigs, and bartering nutrient gel for spare tech parts. He didn't talk much to the other colonists. He didn't tune in to sector broadcasts. He stayed out of the reach of authority, and they, mostly, left him alone. The morning had started as usual. Thin light crept over the horizon, barely stronger than a glow's trip. Snow had drifted halfway over the entrance hatch again. The wind rasped against the thermal seals. David suited up in the same patch jacket, loaded the nutrient satchel, and stepped into the white. It was the movement that caught his eye. Not fast, just wrong. Something small and unsteady shifting beside the greenhouse frame, where the solar panels creaked under ice. He blinked against the wind and stepped closer. What he found made his gut turn. A woman, blue-skinned, kneeling, thin fabric wrapped around her like a discarded costume. One shoulder bare, her feet red from the ice. In her arms, a bundle, no, a child. The child's face was half visible, cheeks rimmed with frost, small hands gripping the woman's chest like they were both drowning. He rushed forward. No hesitation. Years of field trauma response still lived in his body, even if he'd left the uniform behind. "Hey, can you hear me?" The woman turned her head barely. Her eyes met his. Wide, unblinking. She opened her mouth. "Please don't let them take her." Then she collapsed. David caught her before she hit the snow. Her body was shock cold, too light. He pressed 2 fingers to her neck. Pulse weak but there. He adjusted the bundle in his arms. The child whimpered softly, still breathing. No time to think. He kicked open the side hatch and carried them both into the main dome. The warmth hit immediately, like stepping through a barrier. He moved quickly, laying the woman on the floor panels near the primary heater, unwrapping the child with one hand. Her tiny limbs trembled violently, her nose red, her hair soaked with melting frost. Okay, come on," he muttered. He stripped off her frozen wrap and covered her in a fleece thermal. She was so small, couldn't have weighed more than 15 kilos. He grabbed the emergency thermal cuffs from the wall and clipped them to her wrists and ankles. Gentle pulse heat flooded through her skin. The woman was next. He cut the torn silk from her thigh. No shame in it, just efficiency. The fabric had fused to a small wound from a cold. He wrapped a thermal blanket around her, set the heater to full, and knelt beside her. What the hell had they been doing out there? David ran his hand through his hair and forced himself to focus. The girl stirred first. She blinked up at him, confused, pale, and silent. Then, in a voice almost too soft to catch, "Mama?" David knelt beside her, held out a flask. "Drink slow. You're safe. You're inside now." She obeyed. Her fingers shook, but she drank. Then she turned to look for the woman. Her eyes widened. David saw panic rising. "She's here," he said quickly. "She's resting. You're both safe." The girl didn't respond. She curled up tighter under the blanket. David retrieved one of his old thermal shirts, wrapped it around her, rolled the sleeves. It hung like a robe on her tiny frame. Then he sat and waited. The woman, Lyrian, as he would soon learn, woke an hour later. She bolted upright, gasping, eyes searching. "Easy," David said, raising his hands. "You're in my greenhouse dome. You collapsed in the snow." She looked past him to the girl. Relief hit her so hard it was visible. Her chest rose, then dropped. She reached out, touching the girl's foot, checking for warmth. Then her shoulders sagged. Exhaustion replaced panic. David didn't say anything else. He didn't ask where she was from. He didn't demand information. He just sat on the floor nearby, offering presence without pressure. She looked at him finally. Why? He shrugged slightly. You were freezing. That's enough. It was only later that she gave names. Lyrian, her daughter, Nea, 5 years old. No mention of where they'd come from or how long they'd been in the snow. David didn't push. When she stood for the first time, she was wobbly. He didn't touch her, just moved nearby in case she fell. Her wrap, if it could still be called that, barely held together. She clutched it over her chest with one hand, staring at the room like a cornered animal. I'll find you something warmer, David said and moved toward the supply crate. You can change behind the tarp. She watched him go, silent. She didn't thank him. He didn't expect her to. That night, Nea fell asleep curled on the cot. Lyrian sat beside her, wrapped in one of David's long thermal coats. The collar dwarfed her neck. She hadn't touched the stew, but Nea had eaten 2 bowls without a word. David sat near the heater, tuning a damaged regulator with his toolkit. The soft hum of the heating core filled the silence. After a long pause, Lyrian spoke. You didn't call anyone. No, David said. Why? He didn't look up. Because you didn't want me to. More silence. Are you military? Not anymore. She absorbed that, then said quietly, they'll come. David finally looked at her. Her hands were trembling in her lap. Not if I'm careful, he replied. And if they do, I won't let them take her. For a moment, her composure cracked. Her lips tightened. Her jaw shifted. But she held it together. Thank you, she whispered. Then she lay down beside her daughter and turned her face away. David stayed up late that night, watching the door, checking the perimeter sensors. His mind ran through risk scenarios. If Dominion drones were nearby, they'd have picked up trace heat signatures. If not, he had maybe 2 days before someone came sniffing around. Someone always did. But somehow, in the quiet of that room, with the wind scratching against the dome and a 5-year-old breathing softly in her sleep, David made his decision. He would keep them safe, whatever it took. The next morning came with no sun, only a faint blue haze leaking through the frost-crusted dome glass. The wind outside hadn't stopped. It never did. Varellus 9's weather patterns were a slow, grinding loop of cold, colder, and lethal. Inside the greenhouse, the air smelled of nutrient gel, copper wiring, and thawing boots. David stood at the workbench in a thermal undershirt, checking the power flow on a damaged heater coil. His eyes kept drifting back to the cot. Lyrian and Nea were still asleep. Nea had curled herself into the crook of her mother's arm sometime during the night. Lyrian's breathing was steady now, shallower but calm. Her body looked different in rest. Less alert, less rigid, still dressed in the oversized thermal, her face half hidden beneath the collar. She looked like someone who hadn't let her guard down in months. David set the tools down and leaned forward, elbows on the table. He wasn't sure what came next. He hadn't planned for this. He never planned for anything anymore. After the war, after the tribunal hearings, after the Frainhold incident was sealed and scrubbed from public record, he'd just wanted quiet. He'd bought clearance for Varellus 9 with the last of his payout and requested no comm uplink. But now there was a woman and child in his dome, alive because of him, dependent on him. He didn't regret pulling them in from the cold, but he knew what it meant. Eventually, someone would come looking. The motion sensor chirped, low frequency. Not outside, just internal movement. David looked up. Lyrian was awake. She sat up slowly, careful not to wake Nea. She looked around, absorbing the space. Her eyes moved from the heater to the vent system, the reinforced thermal seals along the bulkhead, the stripped-down water recycler humming beside the main wall. She saw the comm panel. Her gaze lingered on it. David spoke before she could ask. I shut off outbound signals. No one's tracked you here. She said nothing. Instead, she pulled her legs in closer, folding the thermal around her like armor. She was still defensive, still scanning for traps, still unsure if this was a temporary pause before betrayal. David moved to the corner and retrieved a tray. 2 bowls of nutrient stew, barely warm, but filling. He sat on the floor near her, careful not to get too close. She glanced at the food. Naya will eat. I'm not hungry. She needs protein. I added red root powder to it. Helps with frost fatigue. She's sensitive to preservatives. David nodded once. It's clean. Grown it myself. You can check. That got her attention. You grow food? Her voice held surprise. Skepticism. David gestured to the greenhouse arch, patchwork crops. Nothing fancy. I filter meltwater through a 3-stage system. Got a few barrels of aeroponic leafy stuff and some root culture trays. Just enough to live. Not many humans bother with that. I didn't come here to trade favors. He meant it, and she seemed to sense that. A beat passed. She took the bowl, held it in her lap, watched Naya as she stirred awake. The girl blinked slowly, looked at the fire, then at David. She didn't speak, just crawled in her mother's side and sat there like she was still half in a dream. She has human features, David said quietly. Lyrian didn't respond. I've seen hybrid profiles before. Not many survive past infancy. The Dominion suppresses them. She looked at him sharply. David held her gaze. I worked military logistics, not Dominion command, but I know the programs. Lyrian's fingers tightened on the bowl. She's mine, she said softly. That's all that matters. I don't disagree. A long pause. Then she said, without looking at him, her father was a soldier. Human. He wasn't supposed to help us. He wasn't allowed to touch me. He gave me a blanket and some warm food. He held me when I was shaking. I thought it was a trick. David stayed silent. He left the next morning, gone before I woke. I never saw him again. And Naya, I hid the pregnancy, carried her in secret, gave birth alone in a storage unit. They found us 3 weeks later, marked her as a contamination case, said she had to be extracted for study. Her voice turned cold. They didn't ask. David exhaled slowly. I understand now why you ran. I didn't run, she said. I escaped. There's a difference. He nodded. Yes, there is. She stared into the fire for a long time. Naya leaned against her side and whispered, Are we staying here now? David didn't answer right away. He looked at the child. She was watching him with those silver-flecked eyes, too alert for her age. She had the kind of stillness that didn't come from innocence, but from exposure, from knowing what happened when doors open in the night. You can stay, he said finally. Lyrian looked up. For how long? As long as it's safe, David replied. And I'll try to keep it that way. That was the most honest thing he could offer. After breakfast, he gave Lyrian access to the hygiene unit. She hesitated at the door. No cameras, he said. No surveillance. I disabled all auto logs when I moved in. He heard the water run. Not long. Maybe 3 minutes. When she came out, her hair was damp and combed back, her skin scrubbed clean. She wore another of his thermal shirts, belted at the waist. Still too big, but better than the torn wrap. She carried herself differently now, straighter, more balanced, but her eyes stayed wary. By midday, David had gone back to checking the perimeter relays. The satellite dish had iced over again, so he climbed the ladder to chip it clean. From that height, he could see for kilometers, just white plains, scattered outposts, and the ridge line to the east where the abandoned mining sectors fell into shadow. He thought about the Dominion's patrol cycles, about the last time a scanner drone passed over, about the closest neighbor, Fenwick, a hoarder with loose lips and more curiosity than sense. If he'd seen anything unusual last night, David descended the ladder, boots crunching into hard-packed snow. Back inside, Lyrian was wrapping a salvaged thermal panel with insulation strips. Naya was drawing on the floor with a stub of wax chalk, circles and stars, and what looked like a house. David paused. A small, strange calm settled over him. He wasn't built for family. He wasn't made for softness. But as he watched them move in his space like it was already theirs, he felt something stir in the quiet corners of his mind. This wasn't the life he'd planned, but maybe it was the one he could still fight for. It didn't take long for the illusion of safety to fracture. 2 days passed. Quiet, controlled, but not peaceful. David moved through routines, checking seals, adjusting hydroflows in the greenhouse, running fuel reclamation cycles, while Lyrian remained inside, always within eyeshot of Nea. The girl adapted fast, as children do when they have no choice. She sat on the floor and built imaginary forts from scrap wire and thermal tubing. She talked softly to herself, sometimes humming. Lyrian barely spoke at all. David noticed the way she scanned each doorway before entering. How her posture changed whenever he reached for something near her. Not out of distrust anymore, but habit, conditioned reflex. She was always calculating escape routes, always ready to run again. He didn't push her, but he watched, and he waited for the question he knew would come. It came on the third night. She stood in the corridor outside the comm room, wrapped in one of his thermal coats, arms folded tight across her ribs. You said you used to work for military logistics. David looked up from the panel he was rewiring. I did. Did you ever work in the refugee containment centers? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he set the tool down carefully and faced her. No, but I ran materials into the fringe sectors. Mostly supplies. Sometimes medical payloads. I saw what happened on the other side of those walls. She stepped inside. Her voice was low, cautious. Then you know why they mark my daughter. Why they can't let her live. David nodded. The Dominion spent decades claiming interbreeding wasn't viable. That human-alien offspring were always stillborn. If she exists, if people find out, they lose control of the breeding monopoly, Lyrian said flatly. And every woman they've sterilized becomes evidence. David leaned back, arms resting on his knees. And every man they've executed for breaking protocol. Every baby they erased. It would all unravel. She sat down across from him. Her tone shifted, less sharp now, more tired. I didn't even know I could carry a human child. Our species share less than 32% active genetic overlap. I thought it was a fluke, a cruel mistake. But when she was born, Lyrian's fingers gripped her knee. She cried like a human. She opened her eyes and stared at me, and I knew she was mine. David was silent. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. He understood. He understood how survival doesn't always look like hope. Sometimes it's just a decision not to give up yet. Later, while Nea slept curled between thermal blankets, David and Lyrian sat beside the heater with mugs of red-boiled stimulate. She asked, "Why are you here?" He didn't lie. I saw too much. I got people killed. Not by intent, by following orders. After Frainhold collapsed, they offered me reassignment. I took the payout and disappeared. Frainhold, that was the site with the child fatalities, wasn't it? His throat tightened. Yeah. I read the restricted brief once. They never released the footage. They shouldn't have, David muttered. She looked at him carefully. You blame yourself? I blame the system I helped build. But I pulled the levers. I checked the boxes. I signed off on the shipments. So yeah, I came here to disappear. And now you're here. She sipped her drink. Do you want us gone? No, he said before she finished the question. But it'll get harder to keep you hidden. Fenwick's outer sensors picked up a double heat signature last night. He pinged my dome once. I ignored it. Will he report it? Not if I trade him enough fuel cells. But it won't last. Lyrian looked toward the door that led to the greenhouse. You grow food. You run clean water. You have heating that works and no flags on your ID. I've stayed off their radar. Then we'll get you caught. David looked at her, voice steady. Or maybe I finally have a reason to care if I do. That silenced her. For the rest of the night, she didn't say another word. But before she went to sleep, she placed her hand briefly on his arm. Just a second. Just enough. The next morning, everything changed. At 4:17 local time, the perimeter sensor chirped. David woke instantly, heart already in his throat. Not a false wind alert. A pulse echo. Short range. Lyrian was already up. She'd heard it too. What is it? She asked, grabbing Nea's small coat from the hook. Scanner drone. Close. Maybe 5 clicks. Military. Worse. Civil compliance. No insignia. No rules of engagement. Lyrian's expression didn't shift. Her arms were steady as she bundled Nea inside the coat. David moved fast, shutting down the heat signature diffuser, encrypting the backup relay, and grabbing the old concealed weapon he hadn't touched in over a year. He looked at Lyrian. If they find this dome, they'll assume I helped you. That makes me a target too. She met his eyes. You don't have to stay. You didn't ask for this. I did, he said simply, when I opened the door. And just like that, they had a plan. They wouldn't run blindly. Not yet. They'd hide. And if hiding failed, David was ready to fight. The drone passed low over the eastern ridge just before dawn. Its signal wasn't standard Dominion patrol frequency. David tracked its path through the sensor loop. Nonlinear, inconsistent. A private contractor model, likely scavenged and retooled. That was worse. Official Dominion units followed rules. Corporate hunters didn't. David moved fast. He disabled the primary dome lights, switched to red backups. The insulation strips along the lower wall panels were refitted to seal thermal leakage. He buried the main heat coil under 10 centimeters of scrap metal and activated the emergency dampening foil, layering it over the greenhouse vent. Lyrian worked beside him without being asked. She stripped the cot, packed nutrient packs into a sealable pouch, and folded the backup thermal blankets into a tight bundle. Naya followed her silently, red hair tucked under a knit cap too big for her head, eyes wide but steady. The girl didn't cry. She held the bundle of David's tools like it was a backpack, small hands gripping the strap with more control than any 5-year-old should have. The three of them moved to the crawl space hatch near the base of the hydroponics unit. It wasn't much, an old maintenance crawl barely a meter high, but it had an internal seal and a secondary heat sink built originally to keep root trays from freezing. Now it was a shelter. David slid the panel shut behind them and activated the manual override. Total darkness. Only the sound of breath. Lyrian's voice was low. Controlled. How long? Could be a scan. Could be a sweep. If they land, we stay quiet. He heard her nod. Minutes passed. Above them, faint static hummed through the structure, electromagnetic flutter from the drone's tracking pulses. At one point, the floor vibrated slightly. A landing. Naya clutched his sleeve. Not hard, just enough. David didn't move. He kept his hand near the old pulse pistol in his belt, thumb resting on the manual capacitor release. He hadn't used it in years. He wasn't even sure the backup cell would hold a second shot. He didn't care. If they breached the dome, he'd make it count. Then nothing. 10 minutes later, the hum vanished. 5 more, and the signal trace cleared the ridge. David waited a full 20 minutes before he opened the hatch. The dome was untouched. No entry signs. No burn marks on the snow outside the greenhouse panels. They'd been lucky. For now. Back inside, Lyrian sat at the table while Naya curled under the fire again, her eyes distant. David poured water into 3 cups and handed one to Lyrian. She took it, held it, then finally said, "That wasn't a scout. That was a hunter." David nodded. "They're testing routes, looking for signs of movement. If someone tipped them off about a hybrid child, they'll never stop." Her fingers trembled slightly. She tightened her grip around the cup. "You need to know something." David looked at her. "Naya has a blood marker. It's how they found us the first time. She has trace markers from her father's side. Human-linked enzyme mutations. If they get close enough to scan her, they'll know what she is," David finished. "Yes." He rubbed his hands over his face. "Thought hard. I can reroute the greenhouse power to shield the comm trace. But it'll mean blackouts in the evening. No heating past dusk. And you'll need to stay low during daylight. No more walking around near the vents." "We can manage," Lyrian said. "We've managed worse." He believed her. Still, something pulled at him. "You said her father was a soldier. Did he know what you were? What would happen if?" "No," she answered fast. Too fast. He didn't know. And if he did, I don't think he would have left. David studied her. She looked away. I stopped believing he might come back after the first month. It was foolish to hope. Maybe he couldn't. Or maybe he chose not to. David didn't press. They spent the rest of the afternoon sealing the gaps in the greenhouse frame and setting up a false thermal leak to mislead further scans. David powered up an old scavenged decoy unit, one that mimicked livestock heat signatures. It wasn't perfect, but it could keep a patrol focused elsewhere for a few days. That night, after Naya had fallen asleep beside the heater, Lyrian approached him again. Her coat hung loose around her shoulders. Her posture was quieter now, less guarded. "I want to help," she said. "You already are." "No. I mean, I want to learn the systems. The shielding. The power grid. If something happens to you." He paused, looked at her, understood what she was really saying. "If you're gone, we still need to survive." He handed her a spare control slate. "I'll teach you everything." She sat beside him at the bench. For the first time, she didn't flinch when their arms brushed. She listened closely, asked smart questions, took notes with fast, neat strokes. She learned fast, too fast for someone who had never used Dominion tech before. David noticed. "You've worked in systems before?" "Briefly. Before the centers. I was a data technician on a Varellan relay ship. Before the war." "Why didn't you say?" She gave him a tired smile. "Because when you live in fear long enough, you forget what you used to be." David looked at her. Not the woman who had collapsed in his snowfield. Not the near-frozen body he had dragged inside and wrapped in blankets. But someone sharper, smarter, still afraid, but no longer just surviving. "I remember," he said. "Now you do too." She didn't reply, but she didn't look away either. And that was something. Tomorrow, they'd have to decide what came next. Stay or move. Hide or run. But tonight, for a few fragile hours, they had light, warmth, and a shared silence that didn't hurt. David stayed up long after Lyrian went to sleep. Not because he was afraid, but because now he had something worth protecting. The breach happened at 2:12 Standard Time. No warning, no sensor ping, no drone sweep. Just the sudden hiss of pressure release from the outer airlock and a heavy, metallic clunk that told David someone had overridden the manual failsafe. He was off the cot and moving before his eyes fully adjusted to the dim emergency lights. He reached for the old pulse pistol, chamber to charge, and slipped into the hallway barefoot. No sound beyond the quiet hum of the heating core and the soft scrape of rubber soles on metal grating. He knew that sound. Boots. Civilian issue. Too heavy for Dominion patrol. Too slow for bounty hunters. That meant opportunist. Scavenger. Someone local. That meant Fenwick. David cursed under his breath. He slid along the corridor and reached the back stairwell, peering around the edge with the pistol raised. One figure, standing inside the hatchway, backed to him. He held a basic pressure rifle, slung, not raised. Bad posture. Not a trained threat. David stepped out. The man turned. Fenwick froze in the doorway, half in shadow. Bald, short, twitchy. An old smuggler turned fuel trader. Nose red from cheap stims. Jacket too clean for this sector. "I knocked," Fenwick said. "No, you didn't." "Didn't think you were sleeping," he offered, glancing around. "Your greenhouse went dark. Thought maybe the core failed. Just being neighborly." David stepped closer. Weapon still raised. "Try again." Fenwick shifted his weight. "All right. I heard some movement. Word got around you were seen hauling 2 shapes into your dome. Some of the other holdouts. Name one." Fenwick didn't. David stepped within a meter now. "You picked the wrong time, Fun." Hey, easy. I didn't bring anyone. Just me. You broke my lock. I was checking for myself. Look, I don't care what you're hiding, Ran. I thought maybe we could make a deal." David's voice dropped. "You want to trade safety for credits?" Fenwick didn't answer. David moved the pistol closer. "You walk away now, and you forget what you think you saw. Or the next time that door opens, it's to throw your body out." Fenwick's face twisted. Not angry, embarrassed. He tried to laugh. "No need to be dramatic." "I'm not being dramatic. I'm being clear." After a long moment, Fenwick turned and walked out without another word. David sealed the hatch behind him, relocked it manually, then stood there breathing hard, eyes unfocused. It had started. The Whisper network had picked them up. He returned to the main room. Lyrian was awake, crouched beside the cot with Naya wrapped around her leg. Her face was pale, tight. Not afraid, ready. She had a small utility blade in one hand, shaking only slightly. "He didn't get in," David said. "But he knows. That means others will know soon too." Lyrian stood slowly, Then we have to leave. No, not yet. Not without a plan. She shook her head. We can't wait. They'll come with more than a rifle next time. Drones. Scanners. A team. Then we draw them off, David said. She looked at him. I'll send the decoy rig north. Trigger a thermal trail and spike a signal burst from an old comm buoy. It'll give us maybe 12 hours. That's enough to get you to the supply tunnels. And you. I'll catch up. You won't, she said. Not a question. David didn't answer. Instead, he knelt beside Naya and spoke gently. There's a cave system south of here, under the old extraction fields. It's deep enough to block scanners. I stocked it last year with backup food and thermal packs. You'll be safe there. Naya blinked up at him. Will you come too? He hesitated, then said, I'll try. But if I don't, you keep your mother safe, okay? She nodded. Slowly. Seriously. Lyrian crouched beside them. Her voice was soft. Don't say goodbye yet. Say see you later. David looked at her. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch. But she reached out and touched his jaw, firm, steady. You gave us warmth, she said. I won't forget that. He wanted to say something. Anything. But the words didn't come. Instead, he helped them pack. Gave Lyrian his second coat. Gave Naya a comm band set to silent ping, rigged to alert him if she tapped it twice. Then he watched them step into the freight tunnel, Lyrian holding her daughter close, the cold wind brushing snow in through the cracked edge of the service hatch. And they were gone. David stood alone in the darkened dome. He turned to the console, activated the decoy rig, and waited for the signal burst to light up the sky. The sky lit up with false fire. A thermal bloom, sharp, hot, and high, cut across the horizon like a wound. David's decoy had done its job. Dominion sensors would pick it up, flag it as a mobile heat signature, and dispatch units toward the wrong sector. He watched the flare through the reinforced dome viewport, jaw locked tight. But even as the signal pulsed overhead, his chest felt wrong. Too quiet. Too easy. By 5:32, he knew. The ping came from the perimeter node. Not north-south. He ran diagnostics again. Confirmed it. 2 craft. Low altitude. No visible lights. Not responding to civilian pingbacks. They hadn't taken the bait. He grabbed the pulse pistol and his emergency beacon, then slung a sealed med pack over his shoulder. He was already moving before the heater finished powering down. Lyrian and Naya were heading straight into danger. The tunnels to the old extraction fields were half buried under icefall and collapsed earth. David sprinted through the freight corridor, skidding over patches of frozen dust, the air in his lungs burning like dry metal. He made it to the surface access hatch and triggered the manual override. Wind hit him like a wall. Visibility, 20 meters. He pushed forward. 30 minutes. That's how long they'd been gone. If they stayed on course, they'd be past the ridge basin by now. But if they'd stopped, or worse, been intercepted, he didn't finish the thought. He ran harder. He found them near the broken water tower. Lyrian stood in front of Naya, one arm shielding the girl, her other hand clutching the utility blade she'd taken from the dome. In front of her, 2 figures, tall, armored in matte gray, helmets down, weapons raised. Private Dominion retrieval agents. No insignia, no unit badge. Just black glass visors and short-barreled plasma rifles calibrated for precision fire. They weren't here to negotiate. They were here to extract or eliminate. David didn't hesitate. He fired once, twice, forcing the closer agent to duck behind a spill of broken concrete. Lyrian didn't flinch. She turned slightly, grabbing Naya and pulling her behind a rusted panel as David sprinted across the open terrain. Plasma fire scorched the ice at his heels. He dove behind the tower base, heart pounding, shoulder hitting the metal hard enough to bruise. Across from him, Lyrian called out, "David, I'm here. Stay down." One of the agents moved to flank him. David leaned out just enough to fire again. Hit the edge of the man's rifle. Sparks sprayed. The agent dropped it and fell back, but the second one was circling wide. Too fast. Too trained. David knew he wouldn't make it in time. Then Lyrian moved. She didn't run. She attacked. She lunged forward, catching the distracted agent by surprise, slashing low at the knee joint of his armor. He shouted, stumbled, fired wild. She rolled, grabbed Naya, and crawled behind the base of the tower as David rose and delivered a final pulse shot into the side of the man's helmet. The crack echoed off the ridge. Silence followed. David approached slowly. The agents weren't dead, but they weren't chasing anyone now. Lyrian sat with her back against the steel support, arms wrapped around Naya. Her chest heaved. Her hands trembled. But she was alive. Naya looked up at David. You came. I said I would. He dropped to one knee beside them, checked Lyrian's side. A singe mark. Burned but not deep. Can you walk? She nodded. Yes. David looked around. More will come. That was just the first wave. Lyrian met his gaze. Then we have to end this. There's no fighting the Dominion. No, she said, but there's a way to make sure they can't erase us again. He understood immediately. Naya, her blood, her existence. If we get the genetic proof off-world, he said quietly, they can't hide the truth anymore. David exhaled hard. The outpost relay on Ridge 9 is still functional. Barely. I can splice a secure uplink. They'll trace it. They'll be too late. Lyrian looked down at her daughter, then back at David. If we do this, there's no going back. He stood, helped her up. There never was. The three of them moved through the snow together. The cold didn't matter now. They had one shot left, and they were going to take it. The relay station at Ridge 9 was little more than a tower skeleton rising out of old stone and cracked ice. Built during the first mineral survey decades ago, it had long been decommissioned, power stripped, comm systems gutted. But David had spent a week there the previous year, scavenging backup signal hardware. He'd hardwired an uplink bypass. He never thought he'd need it. Now it was their only shot. The three of them reached the ridge just before dusk. The wind had died down, but the air was painfully dry. Every breath tasted like rust. Lyrian moved slowly but steadily, one arm around Naya, who had stopped asking questions hours ago. The child had gone quiet in that way survivors do. Not afraid, not frozen, just focused. She knew this mattered. David keyed the manual door release and ushered them inside the tower's narrow shaft. They climbed 3 stories to the operations deck. Half collapsed, cables exposed, console cracked. He cleared ice from the main terminal, powered the relay grid from a hand crank, and began splicing the uplink. It took 10 minutes to stabilize the signal, then another 5 to unlock the Dominion's closed sector net. Lyrian watched from the corner, arms wrapped around her daughter, her face pale in the red light of the console. David tapped in a local override key from his old credentials. It worked. One last open door. He looked at her. Now. She reached into the small carry bag and retrieved the data capsule. A medical node she'd torn from the back of a lab scanner the night she escaped. Inside, a blood sample. Naya's. Fully indexed. Untampered. Matched with Dominion genetic classification. David slotted it into the port and encrypted the packet. Destination: Open Civic Media Chain on Mars Orbit 2. Backchannel frequency: wideband release. He hesitated for a moment, then hit transmit. The console flashed once. Uplink complete. The Dominion's greatest secret had just gone live. For 1 second, no one moved. Then David turned to them. We go. But before they could move, sirens. Low and distant. 3 flashes appeared on the ridge, slicing through the snowstorm like searchlights. They're here, Lyrian said. David ran to the back wall, kicked open the maintenance chute. Down! They climbed into the narrow vertical shaft, Naya first, then Lyrian. David followed last, sealing the chute behind them with a magnetic clamp. The descent was slow, tight, but when they reached the base, just beneath the tower, they emerged into the hollow of a collapsed mineral tunnel. He led them through dark, low passageways until the relay station's lights were no longer visible. Only silence. Only snow. By midnight, they had reached the canyon cave, a shelter David had prepared long ago, half believing he'd never use it. He reactivated the thermal core. The fire began to glow. The small space filled with slow warmth. They sat close together. Lyrian leaned against his shoulder. You did it, she whispered. It's out there now. It won't stop them, but it'll make it harder. She nodded slowly, then looked at him with steady eyes. Thank you. He turned toward her. For what? For choosing us. He didn't respond. He just reached out, slowly, and rested his hand against her cheek. She leaned into it. No fear now. No flinch. Just warmth. She kissed him, soft at first, then deeper. Her hands moved to his sides, tentative but real. And when they lay down together, it wasn't desperate or cold or transactional. It was chosen, and it was warm. Nea slept soundly nearby, curled in the thick coat David had once worn alone. Morning came with no sirens. No sounds of pursuit. Not that day, or the next. By the third day, Lyrian smiled for the first time. By the fifth, Nea laughed. Weeks later, a merchant shuttle passed near the edge of Varellus 9 sector, escorted by a civilian advocacy vessel out of Mars Orbit 2. Someone had seen the broadcast. Someone had believed it. A door had opened. A future had started. And in the cold of a forgotten world, 3 survivors, once strangers, became a family. This time, nothing would take them away from each other again. Not fear. Not power. Not silence. Not ever.